Okay, we're now going to set up and render the final Houdini shot. So let's start by going to Solaris. This is the area where we do our look, dev, and lighting. And what we're going to do is we're going to reference from disk the geometry that we saved out as a USD file. So we're going to click here under File Pattern, go to USD, and we're going to bring in the Houdini walk. And this comes in, and if I go and describe in the timeline, we get the walk that we produced, and it's ready to go. Now, remember, we removed all color, and so there's no color, texture, anything to this. We'll be adding that back in with materials here in Solaris. Now, the first thing we want to do is set up the primitive path. We're going to go /char/ and then the source name. And so you'll see there's a subdirectory called char character, and underneath that is all the different parts of the Houdini character. And so the groups, we assigned names to them earlier. They're being brought in as individual parts so we can more easily assign textures to them. So we're going to call that node Houdini walk. And we're going to put a second node down. This is a material library, and this is where we will start to create and assign materials. So we can do that partly on the material library over here. We can find the stage/material library and put, let's say, a principled shader in there, or we can go here and you'll see we're inside that material library with that material. We're going to rename that, and we're going to call it body_matte. And then we can take that and alt drag to create copies of that. So we're going to create a few copies, and we're going to use those for the different parts of our character. The next one we're going to call the eyeball matte. And we're going to do the eye lid matte. Then we're going to do the teeth, and the last we'll do sort of the tongue or the gummy parts inside the mouth. Now, what we'll see is that these are all being placed in a material path in the scene graph, and we'll be able to associate these things together to get what we're looking for. Initially, though, what we want to do is we're going to take the body material, go 1, 1, 1 with a color, and go get the texture map. So make sure you're using $hip, so you get text skin color.jpg, and then we can set up, for instance, the roughness to, let's say, 0.5, and maybe reduce reflection down to 0. We can go to the next one, the eyeball, again, set the base color to 1, 1, 1. If you're putting a texture, that gets multiplied in, so it's always better to have that as 1 by 1, 1 by 1. Eye color texture.jpg, and then we'll do the same with the eyelids, 1, 1, 1, and then add a color texture. Now there could be textures for other channels, but right now we're only doing the color channel for this. For the teeth, let's just create a white color, but then maybe let's yellow that a little bit. That would make it more like a stained tooth. And then we'll do for the fleshy parts, we'll just use a sort of a pinkish red, a pinkish color here. And then, there we go. Maybe make that a little more neutral and a little darker. There we go. So now we have all our materials set up and ready to go. We now want to assign them. So that'll be a separate node in the Solaris or LOPS context called assign material. We're going to feed into that, and then this is where we'll start to make our assignments. So the first one we'll do is let's go in and take the body and drag that over to here, and it will give you the path for that in the scene graph. And then we'll get the material for that. There you go, we see the assignment. Add a plus, we can do that with another part here. So we're going to do the lower lid and the upper lid. So control click and drag up there. And then here we'll get the eyelid material. Add the plus sign. Click the plus sign. Let's bring the eye over. And we can go get the eyeball material. And there we go. So the next parts we need, we're going to do the teeth and the gums or the tongue. So we're going to start by everything that's sort of like a claw or a tooth. Let's get all of that. So the left claws, right claws, press the control key, lower teeth, upper teeth, drag all of that in, and then we'll assign that to the tooth. Perfect. And the last one, we'll bring the tongue and the gums. Control click those, drag those two over, and then we will assign the tongue material. There we go. Get a little bit of redness there inside the mouth. So we'll be able to quickly assign all the materials that we needed for this character using this assign material node. Now there's other elements we're going to want to bring in as well. So we're going to bring in a SOP import. So in this case, rather than get a file off disk, what we're going to do is we're going to actually import in. We're going to go /character OS, and we're going to call this hair. And when you do a SOP import, what you basically do is say, okay, go to the hair gen, and we're going to bring the hair generation node in, which is all the fur ready to go. There's also an option for a hair procedural, but we're not going to set that up here today. We merge that in so that that's now set up in the path. And if we assign materials, we still don't have a material for the hair or the fur, so we will need to get that. So if we go to here, we can drag over a hair shader and then back to the stage. We can go to the assign material, add the plus. We're going to go and get the hair and get the curve _0. Drag that over. And then we're going to get the hair material. Now we're not seeing it here. We'll probably see that better when we start to render. But it is assigned and ready to go. Let's go to the material palette and select it. I think the root color and tip color look pretty good. It is very much the secondary reflections that are quite strong. So we might want to change these to a darker color just for the sake of this. So we'll go a little darker there, and the tips will go a little not as dark, but a little bit dark. And there we go. We'll see the hair better when we go to render. The next thing we want to do is add a grid in, and we're going to use this as a ground surface and a bit of a background. So in order to make it more a background, we're going to go in and tinker with it, go down, double click in to see the grid, and we're going to call this the backdrop. And we're just going to put this under geo/. So this isn't exactly that. We don't want just a straight up grid, so we're going to double click in. We're going to take the grid node, the grid SOP that we have in here, and we're going to expand its size. So we're going to go 50 and 50, and then we want to put a bit of a bend in it. But before we do that, that's what we're going to do next. So right click on the end of that and put a bend node down, set the display flag. And let's go spacebar H to go home, tumble around, and we'll put a bend of 75. It's not going in the right direction, but we can change that here. So we're going to go 0, 0, negative 10, and the capture direction, we're going to change 1 to negative 1, and that gives us more what we're looking for. And the length, we can just smooth that out a little bit so that it bends a little bit smoother. Now once we have that, we may want to put maybe tab subdivide, and that will allow us to add a little bit of smoothness into there. And maybe go up to 2. So once we've got that, we've got a pretty good background there for our character, and we can begin to set up the shot. The other thing we can do is we can rotate the whole thing, the whole backdrop. Given the angle we have, maybe we'll go negative 45. We'll put it where we need it behind the character. And if we go into the material library, we're going to drag the tooth, and we're just going to call that backdrop underscore matte, and we'll change that to a medium gray. So we're not going to have any texture on that. It's just going to be a simple gray there. We're going to add another. We're going to go and get the backdrop, geo backdrop. We're going to drag that mesh over, and then we'll assign the backdrop material. That gives us a slightly darker background against the character. Now we can sort of zoom in and out, let's home it and then sort of zoom in. And let's try to get a sort of a look at the character that feels right for our initial walk cycle animation. So we're going to bring it up here, put the character on one side, and we're just using the view tools to zoom in and pan and dolly, and then we can hit the camera tool, which will make a camera from that point of view, and then we can check to see, is the character look good in that view. And it looks like we're a little far away from the character. The character only goes halfway across the screen. So let's turn off the hair for a moment just to speed up, make some faster decisions here. And we need to get a little closer. So what we're going to do is we can lock the view to the camera. And now we go from here. And we go to there. That's not bad. That will give us a good view of the character. We may want to tweak it a little bit more, make him a little bit more central there. And then maybe tumble so he starts a little bit off to the side. Anyway, you can tweak this till you got exactly the look you want for the camera. And there we go. Of course, you probably would have animated it to match a camera, but we're putting the camera in afterwards right here. Turn the fur back on, so we've got that in the scene. And what we're going to do now is unlock we don't want to lock the camera to that. We're going to add in a area light, which is currently looking at the front of the character from over here. And we're going to increase the intensity. Let's go 2, camera 1, go back to the original camera, so we get a sense of how our change is affecting that. So 5, intensity of 5 seems to light things up reasonably well, but we're looking at an OpenGL view of this. What we want to do is go to Karma, so we do that off the menu there in the viewport, and that'll allow us to start to see this as a rendered scene, in which case everything looks a little darker than we originally had intended. So we can maybe boost that to 20, and there we go. We're starting to get a better illumination on the character. And maybe 30. Now, of course, you probably want to have a three lights and set up the key light and the rim light and all the different things. We're just going to keep it simple with one light for now. Now, once you have that, you can also go forward in time. get a sense of what this is going to look like at different frames. So you can do a lot of that here in the viewport. We can also turn on the denoiser, which is the button we just pressed there on the side. That will resolve the noise a little bit faster, and certainly when you're in decision-making process, it's a good place to be. It's a good tool to use to help get there faster. So once you have all of that set up and you're pretty happy with it, you go tab Karma, and you're going to get two nodes, Karma render settings and now these settings. Originally you were using the settings from the viewport. There are some viewport settings for rendering to Karma. Now you are using these settings which you place down here, and you can sort of amp those up and get those. Use the denoiser again if you want. You can also set the resolution of the camera and other elements like that. If we go to the USD render ROP, we're going to see that we can now start to set a frame range. Currently it's set to from 1 to 240. We're going to change that to be the 10 to 50, which is where we have our walk cycle. So once we have this set up, we're fairly happy with where things are going. We can just kick off a render if we want. Let me just check the render settings. Probably one of the things we want to do is just the output. Make sure we got the right camera. And we'll just change the name of this. We'll put this in the render directory, but then we're also going to put it in another directory called walk, and we're going to go furdude _ walk _ $F2, which will give us a padding of 2 and the numbering when it renders that out. So once we've got that set up, that's what we'll render. We can go back with our lighting, maybe just pull that back to 20. Maybe it was a little too intense. And then we'll set this up for rendering. So we're going to save the file, and then we're going to render to disk. So it's going to go off and start thinking. It's going to go through all the frames, and so it goes off and does that. And now we come back with it almost finished. We can preview the results by going to mplay load from disk. We're going to go to the render directory, the walk directory, and pick that sequence and bring that up. And now we press play, and there's our rendered fur dude. And you can see the motion in the fur, dealing with the dynamics. We added simulation to the fur, and you can see how it's rendering with the different materials. You see the mouth opening and closing as we walk, similar to the way we keyframed it. And there we go. So that's a good sort of first crack at a character, sort of from start to finish, sort of rigging, animating, lighting, and now rendering. Now, one of the things is obviously the hair and the fur. You might want to do some tweaking on that. So let's get a little closer to the hair and the fur here. Now, we're not going to worry about what camera we're looking in. What we're going to do is we're going to pin that. So we're going to pin the Solaris side, and we're going to go back to the object level. And we're going to go into the caching. Let's turn off load from disk. So any tinkering we do now will automatically go all the way to Solaris. Otherwise, it would have only used the cache. So we're going to come into here, and now we can start to go in and tinker with some of these things. Like, for instance, the length. Instead of having a maximum length of 0.15, we're going to go 0.8. And that will run through the system, because it's procedural, and we'll start to see that in the rendering. And then we can go to the guides, and we'll say a frequency of 30 for the guide process. That sort of tightens everything up, and we get the sort of a shorter sort of cut there for our character. And we continue to tweak that if we want. Let's try 25. Goes through the system, and then when it finally kicks in, then we get to start to see the rendering update to match the new settings. We can also go back to here and play things like the crossover of the clumping. We can be a little more aggressive about that, so it fills in some of the gaps between the clumps. We don't feel the gaps as much. So that's an option there as well. And, so anything that we use to create this, we can have this go directly to the renderer just for us to do tests and explore and see how the karma is working. We can click on the material, for instance. If we want to, we could say, let's make that a little bit more purplish and the tag color a little more pinkish. We're going to get a result from there. Now, it's still not as flamboyant as we maybe would want. One option would be those were the secondary reflections. We need the primary colors to also be sort of in that pinkish, bluish area. Try a couple things there, and there we go. So that's a little more interesting, sort of colorful design for the fur. So, and a lot of this is because we pinned the stage in the viewport, and that allows us to jump around the different networks and make changes that then follow through. And then, of course, we could, take those render settings, alt drag them over to get a second copy, and we can start to do things like maybe change it to 1920 by 1080 if we wanted. We can also call it walk_blue. So you can have different shots or different iterations that you tinker with by the way you set up your Solaris networks. And once you have that, you'd click render to disk and you would get another sequence to work with. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and Fur Dude's been fun.